to Down the Rabbit Hole, the Researchers' Tea Party. I am Ava and I will be your host today. And I think we should start with everyone introducing themselves, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm JP Jackson. I am a dark urban fantasy author and part of the organizing committee of Icarus, but I'm so happy to be here and in Ava's fantastic hands.
I think my hands are very nervous because this is the first session I am hosting ever. I'm sorry, everyone.
You'll be fine.
Great. I suppose I will go next. Hello, I am Dorian Graves, author of all things weird and queer, including the Deadly Drink series, of which Corpses and Cognac is book 2. Bones and Bourbon book 1 is somewhere else in my house. I love to find the weirdest things I can possibly find and go, let's mash them together and see what happens. It's fun.
I am Damian Serbu, an author of gay speculative fiction. My most recent book is The Vampire's Witch, just came out a couple weeks ago. And I'm nervous too, Ava, so.
Well, we can all be nervous together, and after we finish this session, we can write a research paper about being nervous together.
That's probably healthy. I was thinking of just having a drink.
Second that.
I think you discovered the hidden part of research.
See, the trick to the researchers' tea party is we fortify our tea first with alcohol.
Okay.
So having a drink after the research is done is a time-honored tradition. And as a researcher in real life myself, I have to tell you, a lot of good ideas happen after the research is done. So we read about a lot of stuff. We let those ideas intermingle and interconnect in our heads. And then there is a spark. There is creativity. And if this happens in science, this also happens in art, right? So here we are as artists, as authors who work with words, ready to talk about how we do research. And this is what this panel is all about. We're gonna go down the rabbit hole. And I'm your hatter host for today. I forgot my hat. It is here, invisible. Please imagine it. And I think we should start with the first question, which is time-old question: a garden or an architect? What kind of writing do you do? How do you plan? Do you let everything grow naturally and evolve from one scene to the next without knowing the ending? Or do you plan everything, every beam, every connection, every pound of concrete, in your book? So who wants to go first? Is it Alice? Is it the rabbit? Dorian.
Hello. I'm not sure if I'm Alice or a rabbit, but I'm here. So
you are Dorian.
I go between different phases, honestly. When I'm in the planning phase, it's a garden. I'm just like, oh, we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this. And I'm just tossing seeds in the garden. There might be some weeds in there, but there might be some vegetables. There might be some flowers. There's a tree. I don't even know what this thing is, but we're putting it in. And then I used to try to cultivate it afterwards. I used to go, okay, and so we know what we have, and then we're going to do this, 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 and this. But then instead it would commonly go, and now we're going this way. That's not what I planned. Okay, new plan. Whoop, whoop. And so I've just given to the fact that I can't plot things step by step. It just doesn't work. So instead I just make vague goalposts. I'm like, okay, we want to hit here, and we want to hit here, but it might go before we get to the end point. So I guess if we're using garden versus architects, I'm a gardener. I have no idea what's in my garden, but I hope it's delicious by the time we get to making a salad.
That is very nice. I was imagining one of those new buildings that have gardens growing all over them.
Yeah, that's
So
pretty much what our porch looks like, so that's fitting.
that's amazing. Damian, what do you say?
Yeah, I think I'm going to contrast with that because I would describe myself as a little bit more of an architect, which is really interesting to me because I would emphasize, like, for all of us and anybody listening, that there isn't just one way to get here, one way to research. It's very individualized, I think, and personalities play a role, backgrounds play a role. So for me, I'm a professionally trained historian. So we're very linear thinking. And I write, then even fiction, I write with an outline. I can't not. I've tried. And even in the middle of not writing with an outline, I end up with a kind of an outline. So when it comes to research, I like to do a lot of research in advance of it and incorporate it into my outline. Particularly because I said a lot of my stories in the past. I've written about the French Revolution, about the antebellum South in America. Um, even right now, one of my books is set in 2019, so I like to know, well, what happened and when did it happen, and make sure that the structure of the story kind of conforms to that. So in my outline, I have all sorts of notes written down about the research I've done. And so I it's not that the timeline or the research drives the story in and of itself, but they kind of fuse together. And your analogy at the very beginning about how the two blend and kind of burst into ideas really resonated with me, because I know sometimes I'll have an outline of a story and then I'll be researching, okay, I want it set during this event, and something reading about the event will suddenly click. Oh, I think this character just did this. And the only danger for me in doing the outline and having the research kind of wedded to it was that my characters don't always obey the outline. So sometimes in the middle of writing, all of a sudden, one of them goes and does something, and I'm like, no, that's not part of the outline. Like, how are we going to work that in? And they like to kind of make the mess, and they go, well, I don't have to figure it out. You figure it out.
That happens to me all the time.
I know.
I think that happens to everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, you want me to go? Oh, well, I'm kind of both, and I find I'm in the middle actually of transitioning more into an architect. So I'm a bad writer. I 100% own my own blame here. I have now written 3 novels. There might be more than that, but I'm not going to say anything because that might be a secret project. So shh. But 3 novels, and each one is the beginning of a completely different series. And I know I've got readers who have read my work and enjoy it, and they're like, "Well, I'm glad you're putting out a new book. Where's the sequel?" Yeah, I know. I'm bad. New and shiny is always fun. And for me, the reason why is because new and shiny is the garden. I just bolt in with these ideas and just let the characters run amok, and we see what ends up happening. And I can't write just one story within a universe. Believe me, I've got the ideas all plotted out, but that's it. Now I have to go back and start writing the sequels to these books. And in order to make sure that I've tied together the ideas and the threads from story 1 to story 2 to story 3, and ensure that some of the red herrings that I've placed, or eggs that I've placed in book 1 is picked up in book 2, I really have had to go back now and start plotting those things out to make sure that the story is cohesive and continues. I've already written 3/4 of one sequel, and I'm just about finished the outline for another sequel. So I know that the outline has played a really big role. Characters still do whatever the hell they want, though.
Of course they do. Might I suggest the Destroyer? You get an idea, and it's just that one idea. It's like a brick in a road, but you cannot see where the road leads, and you cannot see around it. So you take a really big hammer, and you hit that brick, see what comes out, and then the ground cracks all around you, and you find a story in those cracks.
I like that.
So I'm the destroyer.
Get your hammer.
I'll take it.
Yeah, you do bring up a good point, though. I feel like even if you're a gardener in the extreme in your early books, when you're writing a series, you do have to be an architect, at least in points of going, all right, how are we going to start the theme in book one, and then bring it over to book two, book three, and have everything be cohesive? Because a series is really just a big story broken up into, chunks of littler stories,
And it could just be me, but sometimes by the time, because I'm writing right now the 5th book in a series, and already by the 3rd book, sometimes I'm like, I don't remember what the hell they did in the 1st book. And I'm like, well, I wrote it, shouldn't I know? I'm like, yeah, no, I got to go look that up again. And so it's like tracking those details is challenging sometimes, I think.
I know for some bigger series, there are authors who they will rely on the fan Wikipedias of, okay, what did I do in book 5? Hey guys, what did I do in book 5? Okay, thank you.
I think I read an explanation about why this happens. It's because as we create these stories, we don't have only the story in our minds. We have an entire multiverse of that story, because every choice we make generates another story and another and another. And we just go around and choose what we want, whether we are gardeners or architects or a combination of both, in various measures. And at some point, we live with all these stories in our heads, and it's difficult to remember what was actually in the book, in the printed book, in publishing. So these were all great answers, everyone. And I think the conclusion we can draw here is that being one or the other is not necessarily something that we need to strive to, but we need to just let ourselves choose what is best for us. And sometimes it is better to be a gardener, and other times it is better to be an architect, And this influences the way we do research, as Damian already said. So speaking of research, 6 degrees of separation, it's a small world out there. You're on Wikipedia researching, World War I. Next thing you know, you're on YouTube watching cat videos. Because it happens, right? I'm reading about CC motor, and then I'm down the rabbit hole in neural networks applied to predicting dementia, let's say. So how down the rabbit hole do you guys go? So does it happen to you to just lose track of where you're going with the research?
Yeah, I have to regulate how much research I do because I go way down the rabbit hole. But some of that is not just my writing, it's just who I am. If I go see a movie and it's about Elizabeth I, then I come home and I want to read 10 biographies of Elizabeth I to find out, well, what was accurate in the movie? What was inaccurate? What was this all about? So with my research, I do that too. I'm thinking of my book, Santa is a Vampire, and I base a lot of the story about that on the mythology of Santa and how it was created. And so I was reading stuff about Clement Moore, Thomas Nast, who kind of gave the first visual print of what Santa looks like in our mind now and stuff. And for me, sometimes I have to say, all right, at some point you have to write this. You've got 10 million pages of research and stuff that you've looked at, and you've got to calm down and get to the outline. And yet I really like doing that, because even though when I do a lot of the research, I would say maybe 10 to 20% actually makes it into the novel, because it's a novel and it's fiction. But even the stuff that doesn't make it, I think, is rumbling around in my head, and the stories are, the characters are playing around with it. So, for me, I think it's just in my nature. I go deep into the rabbit hole for the research, but then as I'm writing, I try to balance and level it out. So, it's not like some lecture about history in the middle of an action scene during the French Revolution.
So it's not like the old Dumas novels in which there was a chapter about historical facts that had
Right.
nothing to do with plot.
Right. Exactly.
Dorian, what do you say? Do you gloss over details, or is it important? Do you let your reader's imagination fill in details like that?
Well, so for researching, it depends on where I am in the process and what exactly I'm describing. If I'm researching a fantastical creature, I'm gonna go deep, but then since so many creatures have different myths and interpretations of them, I have to sit there and go, all right, let's see. We're gonna have this be true in the story, and then we'll hint or make reference at some of these, but then the readers can do their own research and decide, well, do they think that's true? Do they think that's false? Is it true for some of them, but not all of them? Is this something that's a plot hook for a later book? Ha ha ha. As for my own research, if I go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, again, depends on in the process. If I'm at the beginning of the process, when I'm first plotting a book, I go wide with my research. It's the, all right, we're looking at this. Oh, that looks interesting. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. And then I just collect a bunch of stuff that might be useful. And
Cat
then I
videos.
yeah, sometimes a cat video. And I just, yeah, as Damian said, you let it rumble around in your mind a little, collecting, percolating. And generally, before I go deep in research, I try to get a draft of the book done, to prove that I can actually finish the book and that it's got enough of my interest. But then I have a vague idea of, okay, here's what I did and here's what I want to do. So let's actually do some research. Write the book for real this time. Like, I feel like I have to write a first draft to narrow down the elements that I might use, and then I can go deep and write those elements really well.
Yeah. Jeff?
Okay. I do a lot of research, and it's silly research. But here's the thing. This isn't my day job, and my day job, especially over the last year, because I work in IT and healthcare, has been nuts. And the amount of time that I have to indulge my hobby isn't that much. It's funny, people say that, well, oh, you're a writer, you're an author, and I'm like, I hate that title, because I know other folks, present company included, who are dedicated and spend hours and hours and hours doing honing their craft, and they have to do it every day. And some people have this drive with it, and that I just do it as fun. It's cathartic for me. But I have limited time to do it. So when I start up a book or an idea, and I'm trying to write something, I get on the internet and I start searching for stuff, and you find yourself going down that rabbit hole, and then you look up at the clock and you're like, oh my God, it's 10:30. I only have till 11 before I have to be in bed, because if I don't wake up tomorrow morning at a reasonable hour, I'm going to miss that meeting, and blah, 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 blah. So I really have to watch myself in terms of how far down the rabbit hole I get. The other thing is, for me, a lot of my books are incorporating demons and old myths, and pulling things forward from Babylonian, and so the amount of stuff that's actually available without going to the Vatican and getting access to their hidden rooms, which is never going to happen. There's not a lot there. So you take the pieces and tiny crumbs that you find on the internet and go, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, this might work. And then so there's a lot of creative license taken with it. So I love to go down the rabbit hole. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't have the time to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that, all that sincerity, and hopefully the difficult times we are going through right now are going to end soon. Yeah. So maybe we can take a second to make a comment on researching, because even if we don't research for a book or don't research for our jobs or for science, I think we should all keep in mind that researching facts is something we should always do. In any case, especially now when there is disinformation and mistrust everywhere. So thank you for taking this moment with me to acknowledge current worldwide situations. So let's talk a little bit about scientific research. And I don't mean to actually do scientific research, but research about science and technology. And you are all writing historical fiction. I mean, 2019 is like near us, right? It's not that historical. Or you're in fantasy settings, or you're writing about demons. And technology actually matters, even if it's fantasy, even if it's modern times and so on. So what do you think about technology? Do you try, if you invent a sort of technology, let's say we are inventing an engine that is powered by, I don't know, demon magic. We are talking about what kind of cell phones were available in 2019, or we are talking about something, let's say, ghost detector, right? So how does technology work for you, and how far do you try to make this technology plausible, relating to the world in which we live in, relating to your readers' minds?
This is actually a great question, because right now I am actually working on a occult cyberpunk. So I am in the process of making a lot of new technologies, some of which do use dark magic and demons and stuff incorporated, and some of it is just me guessing what might be in the future. And definitely for me, I use a lot of real technology as a base, reading through science magazines and and where people are guessing, so here's the kind of technology we might see and here's how it might be implemented. And that's the kind of stuff where I would go into deeper research after I've written my first draft and go down the rabbit hole of, okay, how plausible is this? What do I need to consider? And for the stuff that's less plausible, that's where I kind of fudge it with a mix of magic and rule of cool. It's one of the main things I'm working with are nanobots, and this character who creates nanobots with his body and controls them with his mind, partially with magic. And like, we have nanobot technology available, but not quite to that extent. So I get to play with, all right, so what can I do with the limits of what we have? And then what do I want to do? And how can I bridge these together so that it's fun, but it's also plausible? And I'm not going to have an author knocking on my inbox at 3 a.m. going, that's not how nanotechnology works, and you should feel bad.
I will totally second that. So in my last book, Summoned, there is one of the side characters who's a technomage. And I asked my husband, when it comes to anything that is mechanical and or electrical and or I'm at a loss. My brain does not function in that area. I'm good with words. I'm good with stylistic images, and it's the creative part of me, right? So the technological function of how X and Y equals Z is no, it just doesn't compute, which is really odd because my diploma is in computer technology systems. Figure that out. Coding, a quick story, when I actually had to hand in my coding assignment, my professor took a look at it and goes, "This isn't going to work." And I'm like, "Look, I wouldn't have handed it in if it didn't work. Trust me, I ran it, it worked." And he came back afterwards and he goes, "I gave you a C. I don't know how it worked." And I'm like, eh. So technology and me, we just do not get along. But in my book, the Technomage is having to use electricity and energy and connect it into the spell. And so I had to do research on, okay, so what is required for electrical conductors and for things to work? And because I had to have him spout off information that, at least had some measure of being based in reality. And I think that's the key to really good fantasy or any book, really. You're taking actual facts that are relatable to the world that we live in and making them part of your story. And once you've got that little basis, those nuggets of reality, then you can take people wherever you want through creative license. But without that reality to start with, people are like, well, this is just too wild. I can't get into this.
Yeah, I would echo Jeff's. I have like technophobia too, or electronics. Like if they don't work, I just like freeze up. So if the computer or something isn't working, I just help call my husband. I'm like, this isn't working, and I'm going to have like a panic attack if you don't fix it really fast. So, um, and thankfully, by setting my stuff in the past, I don't have to predict the future with that stuff because during like what you were describing would scare me to death if I tiptoed into it. But I still do that kind of research. I was thinking in terms of some of my stuff, things like, and talk about going down the rabbit hole, trying to find out, okay, when did they invent and start putting up gas lamps on the street so people could see it? And when did they electrify them? Because the important thing I think with all of this is you don't ever want to yank the reader out of your story because they suddenly think, well, that's not right. So, this is really a stupid example. But like, if you have somebody in the 1700s walk into a room and put a light switch on, everybody's going to go, they didn't have like electric lights. This author's an idiot. I'm not finishing this book. So it's important to me to do that kind of stuff so that you're keeping the reader where you want them to be, which is in the past or with the technology and them thinking that, oh, that's plausible or that's creepy because in 10 years that could really happen or that kind of thing. So it's important to me with all of this just because the accuracy can be relevant to a reader. And there are some readers that are just like, too much into the details and the facts like that, and they are the ones that kind of knock on your door and go, and it's like, well, then I'll fall back and say, yeah, it's fiction. I made it all up. Like it's not true. but at the same time, if you're yanking a lot of people out because of some kind of inaccuracy, that's not good either.
So we have to walk a fine line between detail and plausibility and keep the wonder alive and allow people to immerse in a story and to perform that suspension of disbelief. So they are in there with you, right?
Yeah.
So I have a pet peeve. When people say science, they think about engineering and mathematics and stuff like that. But we also have a lot of science that is not that. For instance, sociology and other humanities. So for your works, do you do any sort of science like on social dynamics or types of economy or what is the currency your world uses and so on, stuff like that, that is not related necessarily to technology, but to life, to human beings as a group, as a society? I see a lot of thinking faces here.
I know for non-technological sciences, I do a lot of research in biology. Like one of my characters, one of the protagonists of the Deadly Drink series controls bones, so I did a lot of research in how do bones work? Did you know that there's a lot of electricity in bones in the human body? There's a lot of electricity in us. So that was very interesting. As for the more social parts, well, parts of them I do research, but then a lot of them was just I picked up a lot of psychology and sociology and anthropology in school because I found it really interesting. So it's just stuff I end up naturally incorporating in, not always doing further research. I do that when I'm more building a new world. Like I have another book that's a fantasy series, and for that one I do more of the soft research to go, all right, well, soft sciences as they're called, but sociology, psychology and stuff, going, okay, well, how would this fantasy setting develop if they were, that independent of our reality? How would an elf society look compared to a dwarf society or an orc society while still being, distinctly non-Tolkien? So I think the kind of research I do and the amount of research I do depends a lot on the genre and how similar or not similar it is to our world. Because things that are similar to our world, that's stuff I've researched, and I can do that kind of intrinsically. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think we all apply what we already know in our writing. So if, for instance, I'm writing some science fiction, I incorporate stuff that is already part of my, background. What do you say, Jeff, Damian?
We're waiting for each other to go. So my second kick at the cat at university was actually applied anthropology. So so an anthropologist is going to walk into any given situation and take stock of the individuals that are in play, and then try to understand who they are, where they've come from, what, and through learning somebody, try to understand the traditions and cultures and heritages and whatnot that make that person up, because we all come to every situation with our own experiences, our own baggage, and our own world viewpoints based off of how we were raised and what environment we were raised in. So when I'm creating characters, I think about that, and when I'm doing up the character sheet, there's a lot of, for me, anyways, there's a lot of not just what this person looks like physically, so that I get that right consistently, and they don't suddenly have blue eyes when they had brown eyes at the first chapter. But also, what are their tics? What are their nervous habits? What are their beliefs? What kind of a household were they raised in? What are their traditions and beliefs? And that helps kind of round out that person. So from an anthropological perspective, it's building that profile so that you have some sense of how this person's going to move forward throughout the book. That's my social sciences. For my latest novel that I just released, the main character is getting his degree in sociology, which I know nothing about, absolutely nothing. And I had to do a lot of kind of searching out. Okay, what kind of courses would a fourth year sociology student take, and what the hell does that mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of the research that I do is the kind of research you were describing, more in the social sciences. In my first book, the Vampire's Angel, one of the main characters is an aristocratic French woman during the French Revolution. So I wanted to know, what was life like for a woman during the French Revolution, and what obstacles would she face, because she's very strong-willed. She's controlling the whole family, but what would that look like during that period of time? And I have vampires that get to run all over the world. So you mentioned, like, what do they call the currency? That happens to me all the time, because suddenly they run off somewhere that I maybe didn't know they were going. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh no, I don't know what they call the currency here. Like, what's going on here? So I have to then do some research to find out not just maybe the currency name, but the culture, the climate. How is it different from what I understand? So that's I think that's really important research, for me because I want it to be accurate.
Yeah. A short note before we move forward. So, if you want to drop your links to your books, you can do that on the Discord server in our panel chat. And also, after the stream is finished, you can also go to YouTube. You have the link and drop your links in that chat as well if you want them to be next to the stream. So, well, we took a short break with this small announcement. So my next question is, was there a point, and I think this relates to what Damian was saying earlier, was there a point in your work where research overshadowed the writing? So when you dug up facts, did you manage to demotivate the creative process or maybe spurred it on? So let's say you're researching a society that you want your character to travel to, and you want to base that society in a culture that exists, and you start reading stuff, and there is horrible things happening there in that country right now, or have happened along, recent or not history, and that demotivates you because it's so sad, like humans are so vile, or did it spur you on to say, hey, I want to say about this problem in my book, and I want to present this so more people know about it? Did it happen to you?
I mean, that can be circumstantial because it also depends on, am I the right sort of person who can actually speak to this issue? Because certainly I've read about certain kinds of creatures that I'm like, oh, that might be cool to include in my book. And then I read more about out the creature itself, the history and the culture. And yeah, sometimes it's oh, there is something really big here and something big and important. But then you have to sit there and you go, all right, but is this my story to tell? I am just a random white queer here in the middle of the US. Is it my role to actually speak to this other culture and this other creature that's in it, or any number of other circumstances one could write about? Or is that something I should leave to an actual author in that diaspora, and I should leave it well enough alone and look at something else? And a lot of time, it's the latter. But so I suppose to answer your question, it's less demotivate and motivate more. Is this something I should look into, or should I leave it to the professionals and look elsewhere?
I think this answer actually immediately connects to our next question about how do you approach researching cultures that are not your own? Because some cultures are open and they are inviting people to know them and write about them. So I think these two questions should go hand in hand right now, because this was the point I was waiting for. Thank you very much for making it. So let's see. What do you think about all of this?
I guess if I could then just quickly finish what I was saying
Yeah.
in regards to that second question. I look at the culture, and again, I look at what parts are open, what parts are closed. So for Bones and Bourbon, I have these creatures called Furoribi, and they are Japanese fire spirits. And where that stemmed from was me going, I want to include some fire spirits. I've researched some creatures in Japan because, I've looked up information about yokai when, after watching various anime and movies. But then there's the line of, all right, some of these have a lot of myth and lore and religious significance behind them. I should not touch those. And the reason I picked the Furoribi was because there was so little research and information about them. It's like, okay, if I write about them, I am probably not going to step on any toes if I do that. and that's why I picked them. But then later, when researching, I did end up making one of them half Brazilian and looking into the diaspora of Japanese people who ended up immigrating to Brazil, and now the generations of Brazilian Japanese people. And that was one where it's like, oh man, this is really interesting, and I could talk to a lot about this. Hold up, Dorian. This is not your field. This is something you can hint at. You can, mention it, and maybe people will research it and go, oh, hey, that's interesting that that's actually a thing. But you're not going to go into deep detail, Dorian, because you are not Japanese. You are not Brazilian. You have never been near any of those places, and this is not your lane. Stick to the cool creatures. Do not step on anyone's toes. And that's what I did.
As someone in an open culture, because as a Romanian, we invite people to know about mythology and so on and so on. I have seen works about Romanian mythology that are both presenting this in as it should be, and that are very, on the other hand, are very, very toxic, internationally and culturally. And I can tell you that as a member of an open culture, it is very important to get things at least a little bit right, at least half right, let's say. Yeah. And so I think this is also the kind of approach I would do. I would just see where I fit in that context, and should I or shouldn't I? Damian, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a difficult tightrope, and I think that that's the point of the research and what we're talking about is to, when you write about something, to know what you're writing about. And if you, I think it's dangerous if you start winging it, especially if you're stepping outside your culture, because that does become insensitive. Um, and yet, I also believe that fiction can educate people and teach people in ways that they're not necessarily anticipating when they walk into it. So I know by setting my stories in the past and paying attention to the details and the accuracy of what I'm writing, I've had people kind of accuse me of tricking them into learning about history because they wanted to read about queer vampires and that's what they're reading about. But I'm, imbuing it with, hey, this is the nasty ugliness of the antebellum South. And sometimes for Americans, there's this attempt to pretend that didn't exist or it wasn't really awful. And it was horrific. And if you ever study the actual history, it is horrific. So I kind of like that. Okay, this is a vampire story and we're having fun and I'm making things up, but I'm being careful to tell you the true story. And and I feel confident to do that, of course, because I've studied it for so long. So yeah, I think there's a balance there that we can do as authors, and just it. The crucial thing to me is to study and be open minded to understand something that's not from your worldview if you're writing about it, and you have to be accurate. That's incumbent upon you, and you can't just then go off in some tangent or some fantasy world that makes better sense in your story if it's being insensitive or inaccurate.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I there's a story that I have kind of plotted out and I'm working on, and I have a collection of short stories that is going to come out. Um, it's kind of an interesting concept, I think. Anyways, it's an anthology of queer, dark urban fantasy, and if we take LGBTQ, I have one story for each of the letters. And I've had a lot of fun putting it together and writing those stories, but I am very much stepping outside of this cis white gay guy's world. When creating the outline for the T trans story, it's been a difficult task, and I'm nowhere near being done this story because there's so much that I need to pull together and make sure I get right. And there've been a few times I'm going, I don't know if I can tell this story. I don't know if I should be telling this story, but the story is, for me, is so compelling. I feel like I need to continue to do it, but I have to do the work in order to ensure that I get it right. So, I've kind of knocked on a few people's doors and said, would you mind if I sat down and chatted to you about your trans journey? What was that like? I've sat down and talked to some First Nations folks and said, tell me more about this context. Tell me more about your life living like this, and how does that, you need to, it's tough because you want to find the individuals who are open enough to be able to share their experiences with you and be okay with that, um, knowing full well you're completely outside your swim lane. But it's like both Dorian and Damian have said, I think it's about respect and walking into that story, doing your work, and making sure that you have hopefully crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's. I don't think we'd ever want to limit ourselves by only telling cis white gay stories because, we've got to, I think it's incumbent on authors to reach further and do more and push yourself as a writer. But at the same time, you have to walk into it respectfully.
Yes, thank you for that. And I also think that at the end, if it doesn't work, you have to let it go. So if the story doesn't work, you have to let it go.
Yep.
And also, as Jeff said earlier, researching things of the internet and reading books and reading papers and perhaps even watching documentaries, it's very cold. At some point, you need to have the human component to look at your writing and give you the emotional response to your story that you need in order to determine if this is a respectful story or not, if this is a story that you are equipped to tell or you should tell, right? And this brings us to the idea of sensitivity readers, and this is the last question for today. Do you use sensitivity readers? And if so, what kind? Do you use an alpha, beta, or proofreader? For us, maybe let's say a short definition: an alpha sensitivity reader is a person you talk to before you write the story or during the first draft. It's a person you bounce ideas of, person you talk to understand particularities of a certain type of life that you're not maybe familiar with, like the Jeff's trans story. A beta reader is the person who reads the first draft of your story and maybe helps with a little more, grammar, a little bit of plotting, some like that. And the proofreader is, a proofreader. You've all had proofreaders before. So tell me, do you talk to people? Do you search that emotional response? Who wants to begin?
Because it's going to be really short. Yes. um, I have knocked on a few people's doors and always come at it with a, would you mind? Do you have the time to take a look at this? I need to know whether or not I've done this right. My last novel was Summoned. The main character in it is a first generation born Canadian East Indian. And I have a few friends who live in that exact world. And so after having written the first draft, I sent them the chapters where I was talking about the family names, the family dynamic, the things that are going on in the household, and whether or not I got that right. Because even though it's East Indian traditions and background and culture, that country is huge with lots of different pockets of different kinds of cultures and traditions. And I wanted to make sure that the names I had chosen didn't clash with one another, or the dishes that were being prepared in the house weren't something that was completely off kilter. So yes, absolutely. I think that's part and parcel of the embedding the realism in your fantasy stories to make the whole paradigm you've created true.
Yeah, and I think in addition to having talked to people beforehand and talked to people during the writing of it, I have a lot of academic friends who are very attuned to sensitivity, so they never shy away from sharing what I've gotten wrong and what I need to fix. And I just want to give a shout out to my press, Nine Star Press. I think does a fabulous job as a community of sensitivity reading, and I know my editors have helped me, the proofreaders, the copy editors. It seems like something that the press is very deliberate about helping us all with that and being attentive to that. And I've really appreciated that. I think because you know that it always lands at the author's feet ultimately, but any help you can get is important. And I think Nine Star is really good at that.
Indeed, indeed. So I've never hired an official sensitivity reader, but for Deadly Drinks, I picked up a lot of that while I was writing it because I started writing in college, and that was also my first introduction to queer. So that's where I picked up a lot while I'm writing. I would be asking my fellow queer college students, like, "Hey, does this sound right? Is this?" I'm learning a lot of this firsthand. Is this okay? And they gave me a lot of feedback. It was kind of funny because the process of writing Deadly Drinks and learning about, queer culture helped me realize, wait, Dorian, you're not cis. You're non-binary trans somewhere in that umbrella. So on that, the more casual sensitivity reading and bouncing ideas off of, I've done a lot of that. I do plan on, for some of the books I have planned, to later hire sensitivity readers after I've got a working version of the story after a draft or two going, okay, here's what I've done. Here's where I'm in over my head. How badly did I mess this up and what do I need to fix? Or do I need to go back to the drawing board? Talking with people for early drafts tends to be what works for me. But always remember, if you're hiring a sensitivity reader, that, or whether or not they're friends of yours, please try to pay them if you can, or at least give them buy them a meal or something if they won't take actual money.
Well, thank you all for all these for all the answers today. Do you have any parting words? Right now, we don't have questions from the audience, but hopefully they were very, very engaged in this discussion. Do you have any parting words for the audience before we sign off?
Do your research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And make sure you get good sources. Make sure that your sources are legitimate and true.
Yes.
There are plenty of false sources nowadays.
Yes. That's crucial. That is crucial. And also enjoy the research. I mean, I learn a lot. So it's a fun process.
And overall, be respectful, right?
Yes.
Thank you all for being here today and for this amazing discussion. You can go to Discord and continue chatting there. Don't forget to drop your book links, and see you in the next panels.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.